many of you know, by a show of hands, when your earliest ancestor came to North America? Okay, and how many of you know how that earliest ancestor came? And I'm thinking of both voluntary and involuntary migration, because we have a history of both. Okay, so a number of you know how you got to that seat today, or that part of the story. And some of you less so, and that's normal. In my day job, I work with some of the 42 million people who were born somewhere else but live in the US. So a lot of us hear a fair amount about the 11 million undocumented people. Some of us hear less about the 31 million people who are here with legal documentation or, having been born somewhere else, have become US citizens. As a civil rights attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center, I work without regard to documentation. And at SPLC, we work to give our clients access to the tools that everyone needs to live a good life. So for kids, we're fighting to get them into school so that they can learn reading and math and also American values. For their parents, we are fighting more for a day's wage for a day's work, or for services, water, lights, a driver's license. And increasingly, we're fighting to hold fast to that constitutional promise of equal protection under the law for everyone, such that someone has access to civil rights, even if she came here with a dream and very little else. And in talking to my clients, I realized that they have many of the same hopes and fears that my people had when they came over. But because the immigration rules have changed since my people came over, my clients, many of them, when they leave for work in the morning, they fear that they may not get home at night, or they face discrimination, unable to get services, a driver's license, water, because they have an accent or look different. So when I say that we as a country have been changing our immigration rules, what I mean is that for a lot of our country's history, we had an open door policy. And if you could get here, you were here legally and could stay permanently. You could work in whatever job you could find or create. My people came in those days. My mom's family from Sweden, leaving behind hunger on family lands that had gotten smaller and smaller, divided between successive generations, until finally the plots were too small to feed a family. And when its potato blight hit in 1868, my family was among the tens of thousands of Swedes leaving for American shores. My dad's grandfather, 5,000 miles away in southwest China, also in that year of 1868, his family also faced food insecurity. And at 13, my great-grandfather got on a boat headed for America. He intended to get rich mining for gold in the streams north of San Francisco, to send home giant nuggets of gold to his family. So they arrived in New York and in San Francisco. My mom's people bundled onto crowded trains heading for the frontier lands of Minnesota, where the government was giving away lands that it had recently seized from native peoples who had lived on it for generations. My dad's grandfather never made it to the gold fields. He found a job as a houseboy on a farm in what is now downtown Oakland. He learned English through studying the Bible, and learned also that he loved the Christian faith. When grown into a man, he started a church. He met and married my great-grandmother, and they had 10 children, many of whom stayed here, many of whom went back to China, including my grandparents, such that my dad was born in Beijing. And now when we have family reunions, many of my cousins look entirely Chinese. Many look like me, and many have blonde hair or red hair and blue eyes, and we are all family. And I believe that this country that I love is stronger for having taken in my family. We've been soldiers in World War II and in Vietnam, teachers, farmers, ministers were the kinds of family or the kinds of community members who go and visit older folks in nursing homes when they can't leave as often. And I suspect that something similar is true of you and your families, that your earliest ancestors came here and became American and made this country better through what they did and through the contributions of their descendants, native-born Americans. But my family, we couldn't have entered legally under today's immigration rules. We weren't tech workers or connected. We were just poor, looking for a secure food supply and willing to work hard to make something better of ourselves. And that traditional immigration story, that traditional American immigration story of having come here with very little and worked hard and made your family and your community stronger, that's harder to achieve than it used to be. America has been shutting immigrants out since the late 1800s, when the mix of immigrants started to change. It wasn't all Northern and Western Europeans anymore, people who were familiar to the early Americans. There were increasingly more Chinese and Japanese amongst the people coming to these shores. Not many, not even 5% of the immigrants of the day, but too many, it was said, and too alien. And so I want to acknowledge something that remains true today, which is that American attitudes towards immigration have gone through peaks and valleys over time. My great-grandfather, the one who came as a boy from China, he wrote about a time in the late 1800s when anti-immigrant sentiment waxed fiercely negative, particularly against Chinese immigrants. It was a time of economic uncertainty. There was a drought that was killing crops in the fields, and the gold mines had falling production. And some political candidates were eager to distract an angry population from their economic uncertainty by blaming their woes on Chinese immigrants. And my great-grandfather wrote, "We Chinese didn't go outside after dark for fear of being shot in the back. Children spit on us and called us rats." To which I say that we as a country have long been willing to blame hard times on people who we don't think of as us. But even in such times, the American tradition of kindness shone through. My great-grandfather also wrote that his employers never turned their backs on him, and he continued to live and work quietly until the public frenzy subsided. But even as my great-grandfather was making it, America was shutting the door behind him. That public frenzy of which he wrote only ended when Congress closed out, banned Chinese laborers from entering the United States. It was a ban that would last for 80 years and would be the first of many bans and quotas based on national origin, where we decided who to exclude as a country based on where they were from and their race. And immigration hasn't become a cakewalk since, even after we decided that such national origin quotas were unfair, and we got rid of them as contrary to American values of liberty and equality. Still, we put in other limits that required that people to come here, for most people to come in, requires cash or connections. So the two biggest ways, the biggest groups of immigrant visas are if you have family here in certain statuses, or if you have job skills that an American employer wants. So I used to think that there was a line that almost anyone could get in to come legally into this country. And working at my current job, that's wrong. There's no line for most people. And it makes me wonder if many of your families could have come in if they had to do so under today's immigration rules. And would you be an American if not? Or would your families be like my families and just be shut out? Which makes me wonder, who are we as a country? And who do we want to be? So I'm going to ask you to do two things. My first request is, if you don't already know it, consider learning some of your family's migration history. Where did your people come from? When? How? Why did they come? Did they have papers? What kinds of struggles did they face when they got here? And who helped them find a job, find a place to live? And my second request is that if you already know something about your own migration story, consider learning something about your community's migration story. When did people tend to come? What drew them? How did they get here? And if there are current immigrants, recent immigrants with whom you interact on a regular basis and feel comfortable doing so, consider getting a little curious about them. Where are they from? How is it different there? Do they still have family there? How often do they get to go visit their family? I suggest you not ask if they came with papers, because that gets complicated quickly. That's left on the table. But I ask you to do these two things because I believe that when we take time to listen to one another and learn each other's migration experiences, we gain a deeper understanding of the world around us. We can, by tapping into that deeper understanding, develop a deeper trust that this country that we love is strong enough to face new challenges and flexible enough to welcome new opportunities. And I believe we also learn about ourselves by learning, I suspect you will learn, for example, about your own immigrant ancestors, what I've learned about mine and many of my clients, which is that immigrants, for the most part, are just ordinary people who have the courage to do an extraordinary thing, which is to leave behind everything that is familiar, to go to a place where they don't know their way around, probably don't speak the language, fueled by the faith that they could build something better for their families, themselves, and the communities around them. Thank you.